My goal today with you, just for a few short minutes, is to do just a couple of things. And I want to introduce a new resource that has really come together over the last year with the good work of many of the partners. So what is it, if you will, that we're doing at the state level to make things happen? I'll share with you that, a year and a half ago, when the ERA money came down on a federal level and funded several projects in the state, it was a major game changer for Vermont. $200 million worth of resources, federal resources, against broadband build-out in particular, is a major game changer and a very good one for us. To give you a sense, I'll say this quietly, Ted, but Vermont received somewhere in the neighborhood of around 2% of all federal funding. Think about that number. Little Vermont receiving 2%. It may not sound large, it's a huge number on a per capita basis. And the key ingredient for that, quite honestly, was we're Vermonters. We have a lot of social capital. We have a lot of cultural capital. We had our stuff together when it came time to go in and apply for those dollars. So I applaud folks, like Paul and the organization here that knew what they were doing. They were already on the ground, and it was simply saying, hey, we can go and make Vermont a better place. So the role that I have is quite honestly working with all of our wireless providers, our telecommunications providers, our utilities, electric utilities, the legislature, the regulatory arm, Department of Public Service, all of our state agencies in terms of application and how we're going to go forward, and certainly our congressional delegation. All of these folks are, if you will, on the case to get broadband built out. You may have heard often, you hear this idea that we're going to create this marriage of our smart grid and broadband infrastructure. Has anybody heard that at all? Let me tell you a little bit about what that is. Being smart Vermonters, essentially we recognized that smart grid is essentially applying communications technology to our electricity world. And developing greater knowledge, if you will. And from an infrastructure standpoint, there are places where we're creating broadband infrastructure, we're creating smart grid infrastructure. It's all fiber, it's wireless, and we recognized a point where essentially going from the advanced meter on the household up to collecting that information on a neighborhood level, there's a large wireless leap that can be taken in terms of the communications infrastructure. So smartly, utilities and the VTEL project, many of you may have heard of the VTEL Wireless Open World project, have gotten together to say, hey, how can we share that telecommunications infrastructure? Might sound small. I'll tell you, when we go to our federal partners, they go, wow, that's pretty forward thinking. So one of the things I was asked to do today was to share with you all what are the kind of things that we can do community-wise. What can you do as citizens? And I'm going to jump into broadband VT in a second and introduce the site, but I want to drop down to some of these other ones. It's very evident to us that supporting your local library as a community anchor institution, these institutions will have fiber connections. And Marty and her leadership with the Department of Libraries and throughout the state, we're starting to see, if you will, our libraries can emerge as the town center. They can be the town center for connectivity, for job training, for lifelong learning, for accessing state services, for literacy, and so many more things. So one of the key pieces I would take back to your communities today, support your local library. Think about how it becomes a transformational vehicle within your community. A second one, supporting our local schools in developing an IC strategy or an IT strategy and alignment and possibly shifting of funding that's going to bring the highest possible bandwidth to school locations. Again, our schools in local communities can become town centers. Think beyond, if you will, the walls of the school and the number of the people that can interact there and what might happen there. Having high bandwidth connections, which are available to be built, but quite honestly, it's going to take local schools to say, we want that bandwidth to be there. And we're going to devote our resources in that particular way to make it happen. A third really important thing, and I know this to be true, as we go forward over the next 3 years, we will see a significant build out, particularly in our wireless world as well as our wired world. And quite honestly, on a town and citizen level, giving support to permitting applications for infrastructure that is going to support wireless, wired, and mobile connections throughout the state is going to become critically important. We have a great permitting law in Act 248A. The key really is we need citizens to get behind this. You know, I know in various communities around the state, people are saying, come on, let's build that installation in my town, let's get it done. We need that same, if you will, kind of spirit around. And then really the fourth thing is, and this is the most important, we can build all the infrastructure in the world, but really how is it that it's going to transform what we do, how we do, what are the outcomes? So for all of us, focusing on how knowledge gained creates better outcomes. Whether that's knowledge about your electrical, your electricity and how you use it in your household, whether it's knowledge like Helen just mentioned and transformative in terms of relationships, but how do we build economic prosperity? How do we be more environmentally sound or more socially just as a result of the knowledge that we gain? So that's a question I'll throw out to you. You know, that's the real honest to goodness. Do our communities change and evolve? Is Vermont a better place for our generation and for the generations forward? So at this point, I'm going to ask Deb Shannon to drive for me. And Deb is the Director of Outreach, if you will, with the Vermont Telecommunications Authority. And together with the Vermont Center for Geographic Information and many partners over the last year have developed a website that is, if you will, all things broadband for all people. This is meant to be the central resource for the state. So I'm going to ask Deb to drive, if you want to give us a full screen view. We introduced this last week, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the functionality. I think if you probably got it. Yeah, there you go. So broadband VT and what it does. If you want to keep stopping down there, it'll be good. Essentially, there are some mapping functions on here that allow folks to see what type of service is available to me in my location. I'm flying through. We'll give you an example. For example, let's type in 110 State Street. There you go. That happens to be the legislature. We'll type that in. And what that will pull up, I don't know if we can darken the lights at all a little bit, but what that will pull up is a selection of providers and give us a sense of what providers are available in my town or at my location. If we went a step further in there, we might click on, let's see if we can get, you want to actually slow down a little bit, oops. We might get, for instance, information on one particular provider. In that particular case, it clicked down and said, Fairpoint, and they're a provider. What kind of speed should they deliver? It'll allow us to click right through and go see their services. Here's a representation where we might see, for example, broadband services available in my particular area. And where should they be available? Go ahead. Showing a location. And then let's say one of the things we wanted to do, where are we here? Did you go back? Hold on. Okay, one of the important features here is reporting an unserved address. All of the information that we have with regard to broadband deployment and mapping that you see on this site is from our providers as they report it. And it's really critical with this site that we engage citizens across the state to, if you will, verify sometimes, or in other cases to say, hey, you know what, I'm still unserved. This is the vehicle for those folks who are, on a end of a dirt road, they're 4 miles out, and the connection is 2 miles away or a half a mile away to say, hey, I'm still unserved. I don't have service yet. And as simple as really essentially going to the unserved address button, typing in an unserved address, and essentially, you'll see on mapping-wise, you'll see a lot of non-red space that will be representative of those spaces. When someone types in an unserved address, 2 things happen. Number one, we'll show you in a couple of slides, essentially that information updates on a daily basis, and we're starting to build, if you will, a picture of verifying where our unserved addresses are throughout the state. The second thing it does is it takes that information and brings it over to our friends at the Department of Public Service. And as we go forward, we're looking to filter and say, where is a project happening where we can start to give some information to our citizens about the service that will be available as build-outs continue to happen. Go forward. So for example, here's an example of, you see these red dots, if you will. That's unserved addresses starting to report up and show up on our maps. Go forward. An important note about this site, it is functional on dial-up. So those folks who are still on dial-up, people have said, oh, that's great, you've got a nice website, but excuse me, I don't have an internet connection. So this is it is a site that works on dial-up. There's another function on this site which allows for folks to look up and say, hey, can I find a public access point, typically a library? Can pull up those library locations, give you an address. For example, this is the Varnum Library in Cambridge. All right, forward, yeah. It allows a speed testing. One of the things that I get most often is folks saying, hey, I have service, but I'm not so crazy about my speed. It's not as reported. And literally, this allows you to perform a speed test on your connection. Go forward. Yeah. It'll verify your address and where you are. It'll perform the speed test. It'll give you some analysis of how's your connection, how is it versus the rest of Vermont, and how is it versus what we see across New England. The other piece about speed testing is this too, on a 24-hour basis, updates, and it starts to build out that map to tell us what kind of speeds we're experiencing around the state. All righty. And why don't we flip, Deb, if you go to the interconnection, let's just pull up the site. I just wanted to give you a sense. We launched the site a week ago, and there today in live time is what we are starting to get really through crowdsourcing in terms of our understanding of unserved addresses in the state. So a lot of them are verifying in areas where it's yellow or white, where we in fact don't have service. We know that, but every once in a while you'll see one in a red area, and that's capturing basically a residence, a location where we were thought to have service, where in fact we don't. So very valuable information to us as we go about our mission to say who's not connected. We have a good idea on a census block level. We have the maps that we're working from. We look over the next couple years to build out all those white and yellow areas that you see. But it's those ones that are in red areas that are flying under the radar screen, and this is the vehicle that helps us to capture them. So one of the many functions of the site, I would encourage you as citizens and in your town basically to go back and to socialize this. Let people know that it exists and that we need their participation in the site. Okay. All right. I would say thank you very much. I wish everyone a really great conference in terms of learning. Know that from the governor's office, the administration, and working with the Vermont Telecommunications Authority and our private partners, our federal partners, we are going to get this done. We'll have our speed bumps along the way, but think about what you as citizenry can do going forward in terms of application and how this transforms your communities. Thank you.